Well, it's such an honor and so exciting to be with my old friend Cris and talking about her beautiful, beautiful book. I just love it so much. And I thought maybe start with what got you on to the book, which means let's start with the most difficult emotional narrative of your life. Can you talk a little bit, because you do in the book.
Great. Wow, wow, wow.
Yeah. Talk about what got you thinking about foster care and what happens when childhood is disrupted.
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, thank you for being here, and thank you to the Strand for having us, and thank you, Simi, and thank you, everybody, for coming. Okay, so difficult stuff.
But make it funny.
Okay, so funny, difficult stuff. Okay. So funny, difficult stuff. So, well, I grew up in a crappy family, so that happened, and I wasn't removed, although I lived with a mom, and I left her when I was 14, and then I never saw her again. And I lived with that guilt and that pain for a long time, there was no foster care intervention. And then I moved in with my father, and there was child welfare did come into our family, but I was never removed, and I was always terrified that they were going to come back. So I had this sort of dual fear, where I was like, I needed to be removed at some point, but I was afraid of being removed. I really didn't want to be removed. I just wanted to sort of get through where I was. So I didn't know, like a lot of kids, I feared foster care. So I didn't know how to think about it as a kid. And then at 28, I became a foster parent, and that was a complete accident. That was a complete accident. Here comes some more people that I know. And Adam knows this story because we were both living in LA at the time. There was a girl. I had been a high school teacher, and she was my student, and she got in some trouble, and she was sent to a probation school, and she's transgender, and none of the kids knew that she was assigned a boy at birth, and so one of the guards found out this, and he told the other kids that she was born this way, and they threatened to kill her. And they would have. They were these tough gangster kids. So what happened was she called her group home, and she said, "Hey, you better come pick me up. They're going to kill me." And they said, "The van's in use." It's always about a van. Foster care is always about a van. I was thinking about calling the book "The Van," But anyway, the van was in use. So she ran. It's true, right? Yes, right? So she ran from her school, which was a violation of her probation. So they called the cops, and when they called the cops, they put out a warrant for her arrest. They closed out her bed. She didn't have anywhere to go. So she called me. So I said, "All right, I'll come get you. We'll figure this out. This is outrageous. I'll come get you." And when we finally got in touch with her probation officer and her caseworker and whatever, they said, "Well, we don't have anywhere to put her. So you want her?" And I was like, "Whoa." So that's how Christina came about, and so through that I started really thinking about, how is this system that's designed to protect children and supposed to take care of them doing so much harm? So I really wanted to look into it more deeply. That's really how it came about.
Well, it's such a beautiful, masterful book, and it took you 5 years, and it's rich with these powerful, deep stories, many powerful, deep stories, and lots of statistics. So obviously, I just wanted you to go through a lot of your favorite statistics.
Adam, I asked him not to do this.
No, I'm joking.
I asked him before, I was like, okay, whatever, I can tell stories, but don't make me remember the statistics, because then I'll start making them up. So don't do that.
Which you didn't do in the book. They're 100% accurate.
No, they're all true in the book. Because I double-checked and double-checked and double-checked.
So I am interested in the reporting process, because you spend 5 years sort of in and out, often very intimately in these lives. Can you talk about, maybe with the Greens, that seems to be the family you spent the most
time with.
The most time with. Maybe describe a bit what their situation is and just what you saw unfold.
Okay, so the Greens were a family that you know, I knew a lot of foster families, and I had talked to a number of families, and I was interested in finding families that loved their kids and wanted to do right by their kids, because we all know that there are a number of mediocre families. We know that there are good families. We know that there are great families. We know that there are terrible families. The terrible families are the ones that make the news and make everyone go, "Oh my God, we need to change the system," and then nothing really happens, right? So I wanted to find a family that was really, really great, so that we could see where the system has cracks. So it wasn't really the family's fault, but we could really see where the system isn't working. So I had heard about this family, the Greens, and they are a family in Brooklyn. And they have 11 kids, 4 of them biological, 7 of them foster, and they've adopted some. And I was interested in them because they came into foster care the way a lot of people do. Any of us might. The father of the family, his sister, couldn't care for her kids, and an agency called up and said, "Can you take them?" And he said, "Yeah." So it was a family foster care situation. He took in the kids, and then the family decided, "Hey, we've got room. We want more kids. Let's take in more." So they decided, because they'd had a good experience with their nephews, to take in more. So by the time I met them, they had 7 foster kids, and were a little overwhelmed. And the way that they managed their overwhelm was to become very, very strict. They're a religious family with good, deep values, and kids that had had a lot of trauma. So in this way, it's not unusual in that the kids had had a lot of trauma. A lot of the kids had been through many homes. One of the girls that I follow has been through 22 homes before she landed with the Greens. Her whole dream was to become adopted. A couple of them really wanted to be adopted. Some of them had good relations or some relations with their biological families. Some of them didn't. And so what I did was I just followed what happened through 5 years with this family.
Would you go, I mean, sometimes it seems like you're there
a lot.
Yeah.
I was there a lot. And so I'd just hang out with them on weekends and on weekdays, and then I'd go to sports events with some of the kids, or I'd, hang out with them after school, or I'd just be with them in their house. And then I also show up for important events like adoptions or court dates or whatever. I would just show up. But then when something would happen, like when a child would go back to her biological mom, I would sort of use that as a moment to look at sort of the history in foster care, that sort of, because it's not a static system. I mean, I think that that's one of the problems in reporting, is that we think about it often as like, foster care is this sort of static, fait accompli disaster. And it's not. It's really changes with time. And it's, at certain points in history, it's really favored the biological parents. At other points, it's really favored removing the kids. So I use
driven a lot by who the latest horrible child murder
exactly.
was.
Driven a lot by news, driven by psychological theories, driven by various trends in culture, etc. So, or that's what I found. So I would use these moments that happened in the Greens to sort of pan back and look at things historically. But then I was really interested in the stories, so then I'd come back into the stories. So that's kind of how I did the reporting.
And it's very effective. The fact that they're not saints. They're not perfect. There are times reading the book that you kind of want to yell at them.
Yeah.
But they're not heroes, but they're doing something very heroic, which so many of us don't do.
Right.
Which is taken, particularly these older kids.
Right.
I mean, the kids who are not cute little 6-month-old or 2-year-olds. I'd say the hero of the book, Mary in Yonkers.
Yeah.
Is that Mary in Yonkers?
Yes, that's Mary in Yonkers happens to be.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I thought so.
How'd you guess?
Well, let's talk a little bit about...
Should we talk to Mary?
Talk to Mary. Talk a little bit about Mary. Because when you... it's sort of this amazing...
And one of the kids is like...
It really is an amazing thing you do in the book, because I think it's just when we need it most. Because we've gone through this journey, and sort of through the Greens, you don't get lost in the sensationalist mire of the worst cases, but through seeing just I'd say a solid B-plus family doing
Right.
the best that they can, you get how agonizing this is. And just when it's almost too much to bear, the pain of a solid B-plus family. I mean,
Right,
I can't
right.
imagine a C-minus family. That's when we meet Mary, and it really feels, and I'm sure Mary's not a hero, I'm sure, but she is the hero of this book, and tell us a bit about her story.
Well, Mary is a hero to me. Mary is, right? Right? Because, what you keep hearing again and again from the kids, and I know this from my own daughter, I know this from from talking to so many people, is what kids need and what often the agencies don't support. And I'm not trying to demonize agencies, because there are amazing people within the agencies, but I'm talking about sort of systemic approaches. Is this sense that people are really interchangeable, and that people are interchangeable parts, and it's a whole system of interchangeable parts, and what we need to do is find a kid a bed. We always talk about a bed, placing a kid in a bed.
classification
In
of
the right
foster
classification, and we're always going, the kid's in the wrong classification, got to move the kid, and get another van and put the kid in another slot, and once the kid reaches a particular age, the kid is done, and we sign these papers, and the kid is out, and Mary really defies that logic, because what she thinks about is attachment and attaching to the kids. And so what she does is she has this big house that the kids call the mansion, and it is kind of a mansion. It's very it's big. It's big. It's not really that fancy, so don't think like mansion fancy.
You describe it as the acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
It feels like a good acoustic guitar sounds.
Yeah, it's kind of like an acoustic guitar kind of mansion. It's a little. It's soft and comfy like that. But Mary lets the kids stay as long as they need, and she lets them stay way past their 21st birthday. There's no sort of cutoff date, and that's really important, because I think we all need family. Beyond our 21st birthdays. Think about your first breakup and your first job loss and your first when you cry and you're at a loss. You don't need things. You need people, and that's what Mary really provides. And she sort of gets that. And there are other people in the system that do too, but Mary really shows that in a way that I found very powerful.
There's something in describing Mary's home where these kids might come in really where it didn't even occur to me that you could still even think about adoption, and Mary does, I guess, what a small but important group of people do called moral adoption, where even if the legal system doesn't provide it,
Right.
you say, I am taking on the responsibility of a relationship with you permanently.
Yeah.
Reading the book, you have these kids who sort of enter the world of the book, which is later in childhood, 14 or so, where they're still, sweet, kind of goofy kids.
Right.
And some of the kids, by the end of the book, are in their 20s and would be classified as scary, as threats to there's one guy who doesn't want to talk too much about it, but clearly has robbed people,
Right.
And and this is a theme throughout the book, how foster care just undergirds the populations that foster care is supposed to address, undergirds so much of societal ills that they enter the system as young children, and the system somehow ejects them out if they're not lucky enough to meet a Mary along the way, as they're no longer institutionalized through a quote-unquote caring system. They're in the penal system. Can you talk? I don't want to get too far into the statistics, but talk a bit about that, because you make that point that homelessness, the prison population, that foster care is really too much of our society does see it as that's just about childhood, but it's tied into the rest of life.
Yeah, I think that there is a link between the child welfare system and the criminal justice system and these systems, and we do spit it out. But I don't, I don't know that I have all the answers as to why, except that I think that it's deeply rooted, from what I see, I think that it's deeply rooted in, from what I've seen in this book, and there are a lot of people that study this and that do know a lot about it, but I do think that a lot of it has to do with trauma and a lack of repair. I mean, there's all the stuff that experts will talk about in terms of a lack of resources, that kids will get out of the system at 18 or 21 and they don't have resources and they don't have connections, and so they have to turn to various things, crimes and whatever, and so that's how they end up in the criminal justice system. But what I've seen is that, when a kid is removed at 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 and is put in to a stranger's house, it's so traumatizing. I mean, we really, really need to think about when we're removing a child and what that means. I mean, just imagine being taken out of your family home, even if there's neglect, even if it's not the greatest home. Imagine being yanked out and thrown into a stranger's house. How terrifying that is. So then, what do? You start wetting the bed. That's pretty much number one. So many kids I've talked to got taken out of their first home because they wet the bed, right? They wet the bed, they get sent back to the agency. And so then what happens? They harden, they calcify, right? They get freaked out. They feel unloved again. They feel like they did something wrong. They feel like they did something wrong the first time because they're a kid. Then they feel like they did something wrong the second time because they're a kid and because they wet the bed. Then they get sent to another home, but a more restrictive home, and a more restrictive home, and a more restrictive home. And then they're put into institutions. And by the time they're 18 or 20, they feel pretty unloved and pretty unwanted. And they don't really have somebody reflecting back to them, you are, here's who your best self is. Here's who you are as a loved member of society. Here's who you can be. So it's partly about lack of resources that everybody talks about, but it's also partly about being wanted and valued. And I think that that's a real reason that we see a lot of flow between the two systems. But that's my perspective. It's a little soft, but I think it's there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the shadow in the book is the thing that's sadly, horribly missing, which is just a good enough childhood. Just people who have not the greatest parents in the world, but just sustained attachment over
right.
their whole childhood.
I mean, I think that it's true that bureaucracy and love make strange bedfellows, but love is really what's missing and what is most needed, fundamentally.
So I study economic issues for a living, and
with love.
With love, with a lot of love, from an economic standpoint, unfortunately it does make sense that this would be a neglected area because. The foster care system, as you describe it, clearly imposes a lot of costs on us collectively as a society, but it does them in such a diffuse way that it's hard to allocate that cost properly. It's something that you want government to be good at, but is often not good at. And
right.
It's hard to think of any private actors who, other than, people like Mary who take it upon themselves, but it's hard to think of systematically how private actors could take that on. But,
and is that why there's little interest in it as an economic story? Because I think of it as, here we're spending $22 billion, and I think, why is there not more outrage that it's not being managed in a more vibrant and interesting way? Why are you covering it all the time?
Yeah. I mean, I think from a political economic standpoint, if you're a politician and you actually genuinely want to take on an issue that will both make the world a better place but also get you elected, this would be a terrible one to take on because let's say you came up with a solution that would fix it, the benefits would be very diffuse, very hard to measure, and would take place over decades.
Over generations.
And so, if I want to win an election next year,
Right.
the fact that there will be fewer arrests in 2040 or less homelessness in 2035, it's a hard thing to run on. Plus, it's a constituency that frankly is less likely to vote, less likely. So I don't mean to make an already potentially depressing conversation several degrees more depressing, but I do think what you're doing, though, by articulating the many areas in which, you do describe how unifying the foster care system with the juvenile criminal justice system actually has some perverse and negative outcomes. But at least looking at the costs throughout society so that at least we're aware of it, I could see as moving people in the right direction.
I also think that foster care isn't a discrete, or child welfare isn't a discrete pod with discrete edges. I think that child welfare is actually touches all areas of society, so that actually when we're thinking about or writing about or talking about all kinds of public policy, we're actually touching child welfare. And one of the problems that we've had is that we've only been talking about child welfare as this issue over there, that's something that is affecting only these people in this one area, when actually it's impacting all of us, not only in this negative way, but in all kinds of ways. I mean, when we're talking about child welfare, we're talking about issues of education, we're talking about issues of race, we're talking about issues of poverty, we're talking about like all kinds of issues that affect all of us, that I don't think is that's not just a discrete thing. So you're right in that it's not like a politician can go in and build a building and say, see, I built a building, so now elect me. But I do think that one of the ways to really change the conversation about child welfare is to talk about the ways that it is part of our culture overall, if that makes kind of sense. Not to sound like a politician, but.
All right, I'm voting for you.
Thanks.
All right. So we're going to go to questions very shortly, but I sort of want to know what happened to you during this journey.
I made a lot of charts. I made a lot of charts. At one point, my editor, I've got some people from Houghton Mifflin Harcourt here. I had written 500 pages. It's now, as you'll see, a very manageable 320. I had written 500 pages, and my poor editor was like, oh my God, this is a mess. You need to write all the characters on one side and all the issues on another and start laying them out. And I had bulletin boards over the whole office. As my partner, Lo, was like, oh my God, it's everywhere. It was taking over the house. So that's what happened to me. I got very disorganized and then very organized. And I've always been interested in teenagers, but I really, really thought a lot about the teenagers most of all, because I thought what I really saw was I thought about a lot of things, but I thought about the teenagers and the way that the numbers changed since 1997 when Clinton passed his Adoption and Safe Families Act. How the numbers shifted from, we brought the number of foster kids down, right, overall, and that's what everybody's been cheering about, which is something to cheer about, definitely, but we shifted the numbers. There are fewer little kids, but we've really, what's happened is it's become a system really about the older kids, and they're just getting aged out, and I don't know that systemically we've addressed that, how to manage it. And the other thing I really noticed was there's a ton of studies about the kids and what happens to them. There's barely any about the foster parents. Really, hardly any national studies about foster parents. We have a few in a few states, but mostly it's anecdotal. We really have very little data about who's taking care of our kids. So there's some gaps. So
we're going to go to questions. If it's okay, I wouldn't mind just hearing from Mary a little bit. If we could
Mary,
start with
Mary the hero.
Yes.
Yay, Mary.
Let me say anything specific, or should I just answer questions? I don't know.
I'd love to hear, because I found reading the book that it made me, which I have never thought of before, really want to be a foster parent and also think wow, that seems really, really tough. Can you talk about explain how many foster kids you've handled and have in your home right now, and what it's meant for you?
Yeah, I don't really use the word foster, actually. I just have kids. I have youth, and I was always into teenagers, and that's really what my passion has been. What I realized, because I did begin as a foster parent, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I was very naive and stuff at the beginning. And what I learned, what actually the kids taught me, and that's what I say, they're the most powerful teachers. They taught me that they needed just one person, just me, to care about them and to be there for them, regardless of what they did. And they had different behaviors and stuff like that, but it was really about just, they needed somebody who said that they were of value. And as Cris talked about, they don't come thinking that. And it's difficult. I don't minimize that, and I don't recommend you take as many as I did. But I do think it's also the most rewarding, powerful thing you can do with your life. I don't think there's anything that beats it in terms of satisfaction rewards. They're not immediate. And they're not even maybe long-term, but eventually, if you can survive it now, because my kids are really, mostly grown, there's really nothing but the gratitude pouring in and stuff like that. So, and that's not what I did it for. And there were many, many years. It's actually, this year is 13 years when that wasn't the case. But it's still, I did it for the right reasons. I just wanted to make a difference. I wanted to help some kids. I was originally just interested in helping lesbian teens, and that didn't happen for a long time. But eventually that did too. And I have a very mixed bag of kids. Recently I'd said I claimed 12 kids, but that number has now gone up. So some kids have claimed me, so the number increases regardless of what I try to do to stop it. But as I say, it's the most powerful thing you can do. And what I've done is I've increased the ages of youth that I work with. Because my first child was 14, and every year my ages went up. And so now it's 21, 22. And so, because I find them, again, with nobody. They leave the system with nobody, and it's a constant stream of kids that are aging out with nothing, with no resources, it's tragic. I mean, it's really tragic what we do to our kids.
I think if you can survive it, it eventually gives you back. I don't know if that's the greatest slogan we might have
It's
to
true,
work,
though.
but it is
It's
true.
true.
Yeah.
And surviving it is really not that difficult. If you're not caught up in needing instant gratification, in needing, if you're not doing it for the wrong reasons and you're really doing it, it's a very selfless thing. And if you can get through it and not take it personal, that's really what we usually say. If you get caught up in taking it personal and stuff like that, it'll destroy you. But if you can keep, maintain a distance and, hold on to your sanity, the kids will be okay. And you'll be okay too. And again, there's nothing better that you could do with your life.
All right. Thank you so much, Mary. Thank you. So are there questions?
Hi. Hi. My name is Simone Sneed, and I am the Director of Development for an organization called Inwood House, and we do foster care residential programs for pregnant and parenting teens. And I have a quick comment and then a question. And the comment is that it's true that if you're a politician, you cannot easily tie advocating for restructuring the foster care system to your platform. However, in New York State, with the advent of social impact bonds or the pay for success bonds, I personally think there is somewhere in there a way to tie it to decreasing homelessness rates in the shelters. And so if anyone's working on that, feel free to come by and say hey, because I think it's important. And then the question for you, Cris, is the stories in your book, based on just tonight's talk, are so tender and nuanced and beautifully rich. What do you want the book to accomplish? Is it just to highlight the stories? Is it to impact a policyholder? Like, what would your ultimate dream for this book's impact be?
There are a couple of dreams. Thank you. That's a really great question. I wanted to sort of turn up the volume on a couple of conversations that were already going on, so that people that might not have been hearing those conversations could hear them, to sort of broaden the the landscape of who's talking about foster care, so that it would open it up a little bit more, bring in some more air into it was my goal. I would love to. I think that child welfare is such an important and vital part of our culture. I wanted to have more dialogue around it, really. I really wanted more people to be reading about it and understanding it and thinking about it, because it's so, it's us. It's really all of us, you know? So yeah, I wanted more people to think about it and talk about it and sort of bring in more voices, really. So. And have it be taught in every school.
And she wants each of you to buy a copy.
Yeah, hundreds of them, right? Yeah, that's all. Okay.
Hi. So you talked a lot about the problems, and I know foster care is a pretty big subject, but I wondered if, any particular states are better at handling it than others, or more broadly, if there are other countries that have models to look after that maybe do it differently than the United States.
I do think that there are places that have some interesting models. I think that there's stuff going on right here that's actually quite interesting. I do think that I have a lot of hope in the waiver system, and am curious about it, and think that it's something that's really going to change. I think it's going to change the way.
Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, I think that it's going to change the way child welfare looks. The waiver system is something that Florida has done the biggest thing with it. And what it is the way that foster care is funded. I'm sorry if I'm telling you things you maybe already know, a lot of you, but child care is essentially funded on a per diem basis, which means that every day, if I take Jennifer here, right, and I put her into foster care, so I have to remove Jennifer from her family and put her into foster care in order to get any money for my agency. Right? I don't get any money, basically, until I remove her from care. And then once I see what kind of bed she needs to go into, let's see, she has some special needs, and she has to go into a residential home. Oh, no, she needs to go into a psychiatric home, so she gets a little bit more money, and she needs, so I figure out what kind of bed she gets, and then I have to, as an agency, request this money from ACS, from the city, and then the city has to then take my request and request it from the state, and the state has to then request it from the federal government. This is a lot of counting beans, right? And most of the time in foster care, or a lot of the time in child welfare, is spent counting these beans, basically. It's a lot of just time-consuming, expense requests. And the reason that we do it this way is, for one thing, we can track where each child is and how much each child is costing, and because these are public monies, we want to make sure that money isn't being misspent, right? But a lot of people say we're spending more time on paper than we are on people. So what Florida did, and what some cities and counties have done, is they said, forget it, let's take a waiver. We'll take a flat sum. And we don't have to remove Jennifer to get the money. We can just get a flat fee. So Florida did this at the tune of about $140 million a year for 5 years. And what that means is, with some caveats, it's much more complicated than this. They could take that $140 million and put it into front-end services. So they could do domestic violence treatment, they could do, put money into the neighborhoods, they could do some front-end stuff and not have to remove the kid up front. Because some people say there's a perverse incentive to take the kids out in order to get the money, right? So Florida's numbers went down. There's some good, it looks kind of good. There's some trouble, but it looks kind of good. Obama opened this up in 2011 and said, all right, more states can apply. So now there are 30 states and cities that have applied, and we're going to see what happens. This could really change the way foster care looks, because we're not having this per diem system. I do think that that's really hopeful. I do think that we're getting away from group homes in general. Some states are not so much, but we are overall sort of getting that group homes institutionalization is not great. People mostly know that families are better than group homes, I think. So I think that there's movement, and I think that here we are getting it. I mean, there are organizations like Chapin Hall that are amazing, that are going in and doing their I don't know if it's their primary role, but they're going in and doing mostly like oversight with agencies and cities to say, like, how can we redesign what you're doing to be more child-centered? So I do think there's exciting stuff happening here. I really do. I don't think we're like, oh my God, we've got to follow Senegal's model. You know, I think that we've got
That
we've
seems
got
unlikely.
Yeah. Well,
But now there are negative incentives the other way, right? If
Yeah.
it's the flat fee, then there's an incentive to just do fewer services.
yeah, I mean, the risk with flat fee, right, is we go, all right, well, Jennifer looks pretty good. Sorry to just fade you out, but like Jennifer is our average kid, so let's make all the services fit Jennifer, and then we're not thinking about Pat. And Pat is the like super freaky kid that we've really got to take care of, but Pat's needs aren't going to get met because we're really just thinking about Jennifer as the basic. So that's the risk with this flat fee, right? So, I mean, the overall thing with child welfare is this is the one message, you've got to think about every single family as individual and every single kid as individual. If we could do that, we'd be a million miles ahead of where we are now, rather than trying to find one model and make it fit everybody.
Is that Pat with You Gotta Believe? Is that?
That is Pat of You Gotta Believe.
So he's the other hero in
He's
the book.
the other-
All
there you go.
So he deserves another applause.
Yeah, he's
All right.
awesome.
Yeah. All right.
You want to? Oh, yes. There's a question back there.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
Wait for the mic.
Congratulations on the book, Chris.
Thank you.
Since the book being released, what kind of hits have you got on your email regarding from readers? What kind of remarks are you getting?
Oh, that is so interesting that you asked. Can I say who you are? Sure. Okay. Doreen is in the book. Doreen is another star in the book. And Doreen is a biological parent who lost her child to the system when her child was 23 months old. Is that right? And Doreen is a very, very powerful woman. And we met how many years ago? 6? Okay, so 7 years ago.
When you were teaching in...
When I was teaching, yes. She was a student of mine. So what kind of comments? A lot of comments. A lot of people have been writing saying like, they're like you, saying, I lost my kid, and I want to know more, or I just heard you on the radio. I'm really interested to know about this topic. I mean, really the range. What I've been happy with is it's been like parents, foster parents, bio parents, foster parents, adoptive parents, child welfare workers, administrators, CASA people, all kinds of people have been writing in to ask questions. So I'm happy in that way because nobody's writing saying, you demonized me and my side, because I really don't feel like there are bad guys in child welfare, in my opinion. I don't think that there's, I've met some parents that I think are kind of bad guys, but there's no like bad guy role, so I haven't had any like, you've done it, but mostly people have been pretty interested, and yeah, thank you.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Chris, you knew a lot about foster care before you started writing the book. What would you say is the thing that surprised you the most after your 5 years in this, in terms of what you learned?
Yeah. Couple things. Well, when I started doing the research, I was surprised at how little was known, because I hadn't researched. I was surprised at how little was known about foster parents, and what range there is in how much training we need to give them. In some states, we don't have to train them at all, right? They have 0 hours. Some states we have to give them a lot. There's no sort of consistency in that. I was surprised at how, because this happened with my own daughter, how consistently, and I thought she was just sort of anomalous, and how consistently the kids need to stay connected with their biological family. How I saw that again and again and again. And even when it's destructive to them, even when they know it's destructive to them, they will go back. And I think that the system doesn't make a lot of allowances for that, and doesn't necessarily train the families for how to manage that, and that's something that needs to be thought about more. I was not surprised by how directors and commissioners and things speak in acronyms that are completely incomprehensible. And I was. There are so many really smart people in here in this field, really, really caring, dedicated, smart, creative people doing really great work, that mostly what they're bucking up against is bureaucratic gridlock. That's really what I find. Yeah.
Do you know if Commissioner Richter has read the book, and if so, has he commented? Because I think the comment that you made is that there's no wrong person in the system.
Yeah.
I think the system is scary in itself, but I think that most people are on the same page.
Right.
And when I think about the commissioner, with the changes that he's trying to make, starting with the close to home,
Yeah.
starting with what he's doing in prevention with the evidence-based programs, it feels to me like what he's trying to do are to keep children in their homes and not separate them
Yeah.
out. So I'm wondering if he's read your book, if he knows about your book, or if he's
He
commented
knows about it.
on
I
it.
interviewed him.
You did?
I did. And he was, he was very careful. There were 2 media people in the room while he talked. They had a lot of hand signals. So he was being very careful when he talked to me. I couldn't quite get him to be very extemporaneous. So I didn't really get him to, so yes, I've sent him the book because he's read it. I mean, because he was in it. And I was, in the book, I talk about close to home, and I question some of what he's done with close to home so far, because I've been very happy. For those of you that don't know, Close to Home has been a movement to bring the kids that are up in RTCs, the residential treatment centers, up outside of the city. It's to bring them into the city and be closer to home. Mostly, there's some other components to it, but that's largely it. So far what they've been doing is they've been bringing the JD, the juvenile delinquent kids, into the city. But there are foster kids that are up there that haven't committed crimes that are not being brought back. So I've questioned why the focus has been really on the JD kids and not on the foster kids, and why the foster kids are staying up in the RTCs. And, you know, I have personally, and I'd be curious to see what some of you think, I personally have some questions about, and about they've merged ACS and juvenile justice, and most people think that this is a great idea, because it's, they say, oh, so many kids are just dual involved, right? So they can get both services. Well, I think it's this presumption of a foregone conclusion that's a little bit upsetting. What if we combined, I mean, this is me being the idealist, but what if we combined foster care and the libraries? You know, because those kids are dual involved. You know, what if we just had a different kind of thinking about this? You know, like why is it always this kind of model, you know? I think Commissioner Richter is very, we can't tell yet, is my sense of him. But I do think that there aren't really, I don't think he's a bad guy. You know, I don't think he's a bad guy, but it's hard to tell exactly. I think he's a politician, you know?
We have time for
Yeah.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
I'm Terry,
Hi,
and
Terry.
I'm just a bystander, interested bystander.
Great.
Thank you very much for the work you're both doing.
Yeah.
And I just have a question. You've been getting us a sense of the public. One of the reasons why we can't get more system energy from the public
Yeah.
is because there's no votes, in addition to the fact that the kids aren't voting and the parents aren't
Yeah.
voting and the social workers aren't voting. There isn't anybody to vote for because nobody's touting this as an issue. Where are we in terms of someday the general public is going to say, well, I've had it, I'm mad, and I'm not going to take it anymore? Do you have any sense of that? If that's a clear question.
Yeah, no. You mean that people will say enough with this child welfare system?
Yeah, the general public, the people who don't, quotes, know about foster care.
I don't know. Does anybody? Some of you might have a better sense of that. Does anybody feel like that people are going to rise up?
I have an opinion about that.
Go ahead.
And I might have heard it on your show. I don't know whose show I
It might
heard
be
it
his
on.
opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, on one of the NPR shows. and about how politicians, it depends on what committee that they're on and how easily re-electable they are, going back to this idea, and the education committees for the federal government. Those people who sit on those committees get the least amount of donations because they're not sitting on the energy committee getting all the petroleum dollars. They're not the ones, they're not the real movers and shakers, because who's funding the education system? Well, definitely not Exxon. Or DuPont, or, I'm in the pharmaceutical, like us. And so I can't remember what program, but I think this speaks to exactly what you're saying on how do we look at the system, and then how do we as individuals look at the system, and then who are we going to entrust inside the federal government to actually listen to us, because we don't have those kind of funds.
Well, there's a congressional caucus on foster care now. That has it's mostly representatives. There are 100 and some of them, and it's Karen Bass and Charlie Rangel and then Michelle Bachmann. It's bipartisan, which But what? Is she bipolar?
What?
No, it's bipartisan. We're not spreading rumors. Oh yeah, she's a foster parent. Yeah, yeah, she is. Yeah, and they've done a congressional listening tour, which has gotten some attention because they've gone to Florida. They just did New York. They've done Florida. They've done Seattle. They've done LA. They've done maybe Miami, or maybe I'm making that up somewhere. And so they've been going around, and that has and I don't think it has big bucks, but it has a lot of people, and that's the first time this has ever happened. So I think that there is some political movement here.
I mean, I would.
Yeah, go ahead. Maybe you know more.
I think that the way anything would change is a politician who had power for some other reason decided for some personal reason I remember spending a day at Capitol Hill with some lobbyists for the Haitian government. Nobody wants to talk to lobbyists from the Haitian government. They have no pull in the world. And they just needed to find those senators and congresspeople who just happened to have visited Haiti or had
It's always personal, right?
Yeah, or had a staff member who was from Haiti. But when they found those people and got them together, they could sometimes get those people to use a tiny shred of their power in a good direction.
And on that tip, I think that's what this book really taught me, and that's what is true about foster care. It's not an abstraction. It's not a system out there. It's really about those personal connections. That's when it works best, is when you know somebody in it, when you're pulled into care, or when you become a parent. It's because you know that kid and care about that kid. That's when it works. That's when the magic happens, and that's where we're going to actually see some change. It's not about really changing like the system in a big way. It's not like we can sort of rebuild the building. It's about kind of knowing someone individually and working within that.
Which is probably why we have gay marriage in many places.
Yeah, that is probably. I think that's analogous. Actually, is when people change their minds, it's because I hate gay people, and then my brother. Yeah. I mean, that really is how it works.
I mean, I hate my brother, but not. Yeah. So I would like to ask one question. I think we're running out of time, but. I found myself, which I had never occurred to me before, feeling like, wait, maybe I'd like to be a foster parent. And what's involved?
We've got a couple of people here that can help you out.
And maybe Pat can talk about his sort of remarkable program, which is a little different from regular. But can you talk a minute? Maybe we could ask Pat to talk a little about just what does it take? How does someone become a foster parent?
Well, there's the practical thing, which is you have to take, it's different state by state, city by city, and it's basically like 10 weeks of classes and some hours. So it's practically not impossible, right? That's not the hard part. What's amazing about this program, you got to believe, is that they start with the kid. They start with who the kid knows.
That's Pat's program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea is that it's homelessness prevention rather than thinking about it as, and that's why I found it so interesting. That's why I wrote about it, was because it's not an agency that says, oh no, here's a kid, here's a crisis. Let's put the kid in an available bed. What they say is, oh, here's a kid. Who does the kid know? The kid knows somebody. And all the families that I know work. That's how I came into my daughter, was she was in trouble. So I said, oh my gosh, you've got to, we can have a bed, okay, we love each other, okay, let's make this work for a long time. And that's why it worked long term, was because I cared about her and committed to her, and then it lasted. And that's the way their program functions, is they find kids through all the agencies, and then they say, who do you know? And then from that, they work with the parents, and then they give them that support. But I might not be explaining it in the best way. You want to give it a shot?
I mean, that was very nice. I mean,
Okay.
but the other thing is, we are still very interested in anybody like you from the general public to take a learning experience, because we've made wonderful connections with young people they previously did not know.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's because we actually have them sharing the same time and space during our education process.
So it starts with a class?
Yes, I would say sign up immediately to take a 10-week learning experience.
Like right now.
And we're doing so that's.
Can I tell my wife when the kid comes home? Or
Well, no, bring your wife with you.
Yeah.
And there's no commitment to take a learning experience. And we've had lots of people from the general public really connect with the kid because they became acquainted with them through the learning experience. So that's what we encourage everybody in this room too. Just learn about it. And a good significant percentage, even if it's 20% of you, will wind up going ahead and doing it, and that's what we need.
And then, so you and is that typical? You would start with some kind of training program, and then you get certified, licensed?
What happens is, so you take a class, and usually in New York, they last 10 weeks. Yeah. And it's a few hours a week. And then what happens is you have, and this happens in every state, somebody comes into your house and makes sure that your house, and this happens if you're adopting through a private agency too, it's the same process. They come to your house and they make sure that you have a bed and you have the right number of square feet and a door that closes, and they make sure that you are, and they do a background check and they make sure that your house looks fine and that you seem fine, and it's pretty simple.
You don't want to go that far. You can do the 10 weeks and nobody comes to your
Yeah,
house.
Right.
but this is to legally do it.
Yeah.
And then they put you on a list, and then you tell them what kind of person you want, and it kind of goes from there. So it's pretty, you want to do it, it's not that hard, what happens is when the kids come, then it's a story. The setup is not the problem.
If you happen to work at a university, you might know somebody who needs you, and you'll figure it out now.
Yeah.
You have an awareness about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Wonderful. Well, we have come to the end of our allotted time for the evening. On behalf of the Strand, thank you so much, Cris Beam and Adam Davidson, for joining us this evening. Thank you also for you guys for being here. If you haven't already, make sure you check out a copy of To the End of June before you leave. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.